A Story of Lord Arthur Savile's Crime by Oscar Wilde, Chapter 1. It was Lady Windermere's last reception before Easter, and Bentinck House was even more crowded than usual. 6 cabinet ministers had come on from the Speaker's levee in their stars and ribbons. All the pretty women wore their smartest dresses, and at the end of the picture gallery stood the Princess Sophia of Kursaal, a heavy Tartar-looking lady with teeny black eyes and wonderful emeralds, talking bad French at the top of her voice, and laughing immoderately at everything that was said to her. It was certainly a wonderful medley of people. Gorgeous peeresses chatted affably to faience radicals, popular preachers brushed coattails with eminent skeptics. A perfect bevy of bishops kept following a stout prima donna from room to room. On the staircase stood several royal academicians disguised as artists, and it was said that at one time the supper room was absolutely crammed with geniuses. In fact, it was one of Lady Windermere's best nights, and the princess stayed till nearly 11:30. As soon as she had gone, Lady Windermere returned to the picture gallery, where a celebrated political economist was solemnly explaining the scientific theory of music to an indignant virtuoso from Hungary, and began to talk to the Duchess of Paisley. She looked wonderfully beautiful with her grand ivory throat, her large blue forget-me-not eyes, and her heavy coils of golden hair. Or, poor they were, not that pale straw color that nowadays usurps the gracious name of gold, but such gold as is woven into sunbeams or hidden in a strange amber. And they gave to her face something of the frame of a saint, with not a little of the fascination of sinner. She was a curious psychological study. Early in life, she had discovered the important truth that nothing looks so like innocence as an indiscretion, and by a series of reckless escapades, half of them quite harmless, she had acquired all the privilege of a personality. She had more than once changed her husband. Indeed, Debrett credits her with 3 marriages, but as she had never changed her lover, the world had long ago ceased to talk scandal about her. She was now 40 years of age, childless, and with that inordinate passion for pleasure which is the secret of remaining young. Suddenly, she looked eagerly round the room, and said in her clear, contralto voice, "Where is my Chair's maidis?" "Your what, ladies?" exclaimed the Duchess, giving an involuntary start. "My Cheiromantist, Duchess. I can't live without him at present." "Dear Gladys, you are always so original," murmured the Duchess, trying to remember what a Cheiromantist really was, and hoping it was not the same as Chiropodist. "He comes to see my hand twice a week regularly," continued the Lady Windermere, "and is almost interesting about it." "Good heavens!" said the Duchess to herself. "He's a sort of Chiropodist after all. How very dreadful! I hope he is a foreigner at any rate. It wouldn't be quite so bad then." "I must certainly introduce him to you." "Introduce him!" cried the Duchess. "You don't mean to say he is here?" And she began looking about for a small tortoise, shell fan, and very tattered last shawl, so as to be ready to go at a moment's notice. "Of course, he is here." "I will not dream of giving a party without him. He tells me I have a pure physics hand, and that if my thumb had been the last little bit shorter, I should have been a confirmed pessimist. and gone into a convent." "Oh, I see," said the Duchess again, feeling very much relieved. "He tells fortunes, I suppose." "And misfortune too," answered the Lady Windermere. "Any man of them. Next year, for instance, I'm in a great danger, both by land and sea, so I'm going to live in a balloon and draw up my dinner in a basket every evening. It is all written down on my little finger, or on the palm of my hand. I forgot which. But surely that is tempting Providence, ladies." "Oh, my dear Duchess, surely Providence can resist temptation by this time. I think everyone should have their hands told once a month, so as to know what to do." "Of course, one does it all the same, but it is so pleasant to be warned. Now, if someone doesn't go and fetch Mr. Podgers at once, I shall have to go myself." "Let me go, Lady Windermere," said a tall, handsome young man who was standing by, listening to the conversation with an amused smile. "Oh, thank you so much, Lord Arthur, but I'm afraid you wouldn't recognize me." "If he's as wonderful as you say, Lady Windermere, I couldn't well miss him. Tell me what he is like, and I'll bring him to you at once." "Oh, well, he's not a bit like a cheiromantist. He's not mysterious or exoteric or romantic looking. He's a little stoned man with a funny bald head and great gold-rimmed spectacles. Something between a family doctor and country attorney." "I'm really very sorry, but it is not my fault. People are so annoying. All my pianists look exactly like poets, and all my poets look exactly like pianists. And I remember last season asking a most dreadful conspirator to dinner. A man who had blown up ever so many people and always wore a coat of mail and carried a dagger up his shirt sleeve. And do you know that when he came, he looked just like a nice old clergyman and cracked jokes all the evening? Of course, he was very amusing and all that, but I was awful disappointed. And when I asked him about the coat of mail, he only laughed and said it was far too cold to wear in England. Ah, here is Mr. Podgers." "Now, Mr. Podgers, I want you to tell the Duchess of Paisley's hand." "Duchess, you must take your glove off. No, not the left hand, the other." "Dear Gladys, I really don't think it is quite right," said the Duchess feebly unbuttoning a rather soiled kid glove. "Nothing interesting ever is," said the Lady Windermere. "En fait, le monde est ainsi, but I must introduce you. Duchess, this is Mr. Podgers, my paid cheiromantist. Mr. Podgers, this is the Duchess of Paisley, and if you say that she has larger mountains of the moon than I have, I will never believe in you again." "I'm sure, Gladys, there is nothing on the kind of my heart," said the Duchess gravely. "Your Grace is quite right," said Mr. Podgers, glancing at the little fat hands within short square finger. "The mountain of the moon is not developed. The line of life, however, is excellent. Kindly bend the wrist. Thank you. 3 district lines on the wrist case. You will live to a great age, Duchess, and be extremely happy. Ambition, very moderate. Line of intellect, not enguarded. Line of heart." "Now, do be indiscreet, Mr. Podgers," cried Lady Windermere. "Nothing would give me greater pleasure," said Mr. Podgers, bowing, "if the Duchess ever had been, But I'm sorry to say that I see great permanence of affection combined with a strong sense of duty. Pray, go on, Mr. Podgers, said the Duchess, looking quite pleased. Economy is not the last of your Grace's virtues, continued Mr. Podgers, and Lady Windermere went off into fits of laughter. Economy is a very good thing, remarked the Duchess compassionately. When I married Paisley, he had 11 castles, and not a single house fit to live in. And now he has 12 houses, and not a single castle, cried Lady Windermere. Well, my dear, said the Duchess, I like comfort, said Mr. Podgers, and modern improvements, and hot water laid on in every bedroom. Your Grace is quite right. Comfort is the only thing our civilization can give us. You have told the Duchess' character admirably, Mr. Podgers, and now you must tell Lady Floras. And in answer to a nod from the smiling hostess, a tall girl with sandy scott hair and high-shoulder blades stepped awkwardly from behind the sofa and held out a long, bony hand with spatulated fingers. Ah, a pianist! I see, said Mr. Podgers. An excellent pianist, but perhaps hardly a musician. Very reserved, very honest, and with a great love of animals. Quite true, exclaimed the Duchess, turning to Lady Windermere. Absolutely true. Flora keeps 24 collie dogs at Monkloysk, and would turn Howard Town House into a menagerie if her father would let her. Well, that is just what I do with my house every Thursday evening, cried Lady Windermere, laughing. Only I like lions better than collie dogs. You're a mistake, Lady Windermere, said Mr. Podgers with a pompous bow. If a woman can't make her mistakes charming, she is only a female, was the answer. But you must read some more hands for us. Come, Sir Thomas, show Mr. Podgers yours. And a genial-looking old gentleman in a white waistcoat came forward and held out a thick, rude hand with a very long third finger. An adventurous nature, for long voyage in the past and one to come. Been shipwrecked 3 times, no only twice, but in danger of a shipwreck your next journey. A strong conservative, very punctual, and with a passion for collecting curiosities. Had a severe illness between the ages 16 and 18, was left a fortune when about 30, great aversion to cats and radicals. Extraordinary, exclaimed Sir Thomas. You must really tell my wife's hands too. Your second wife's is, said Mr. Podgers quietly, still keeping Sir Thomas' hands in his. Your second wife? I shall be charmed, but Lady Marvel, a melancholy-looking woman with brown hair and sentimental eyelashes, entirely declined to have her past of her future exposed. And nothing that Lady Windermere could do now induced Monsieur Nikolov, the Russian ambassador, even to take his gloves off. In fact, many people seemed afraid to face the old little man with his stereotyped smile, his gold spectacles, and his bright, beady eyes, and when he told poor Lady Ephemer, right out before everyone, that she did not care a bit for music, but was extremely fond of musician, it was generally felt that chiromancy was a most dangerous science, and one that ought not to be encouraged except in a tete. Lord Arthur Savile, however, who did not know anything about Lady Fermore's unfortunate story, and who had been watching Mr. Podgers with a great deal of interest, was filled with an immense curiosity to have his own hand read, and feeling somewhat shy about putting himself forward, crossed over the room to where Lady Windermere was sitting, and, with a charming blush, asked her if she thought Mr. Podgers would mind. "Of course, he won't mind," said Lady Windermere. "That is what he is here for. All my lions, Lord Arthur, are performing lions, and jump through hoops whenever I ask them. But I must warn you beforehand that I shall tell Sibylle everything. She's coming to lunch with me tomorrow to talk about bonnets, and if Mr. Podgers finds out that you have a bad temper, or a tendency to go out, or a wife living in Bayswater, I shall certainly let her know all about you." Lord Arthur smiled and shook his head. "I'm not afraid," he answered. "Sibylle knows me as well as I know her. Ah, I'm a little sorry to hear you say that the proper basis for marriage is a mutual misunderstanding. No, I'm not at all cynical. I have merely got experience, which, however, is very much the same thing. Mr. Podgers, Lord Arthur Savile is dying to have his hand raked. Don't tell him that he is engaged to one of the most beautiful girls in London, because that appeared in the Morning Post a month ago." "Dear Lady Windermere," cried the Marchioness of Jedburgh, "do let Podgers stay here a little longer. He has just told me I should go on the stage, and I'm so interested." "If he has told you that, Lady Jedburgh, I shall certainly take him away. Come over at once, Mr. Podgers, and write Lord Arthur's hand." "Well," said Lady Jedburgh, making a little mouse as she rose from the sofa, "if I'm not to be allowed to go on the stage, I must be allowed to be a part of the audience, at any rate." "Of course, we are all going to be part of the audience," said Lady Windermere. "And now, Mr. Podgers, be sure and tell us something nice. Lord Arthur is one of my special favorites." But when Mr. Podgers saw Lord Arthur's hand, he grew curious pale, and said nothing. A shudder seemed to pass through him, and his great bushy eyebrows twitched convulsively, an odd, irritating way they had when he was puzzled. Then some huge beds of perspiration broke out on his yellow forehead, like poisonous dew, and his fat finger grew cold and clammy. Lord Arthur did not fail to notice this strange sign of agitation, and for the first time in his life, he himself felt fear. His impulse was to rush from the room, but he restrained himself. It was better to know the worst, whatever it was, than to be left in this hideous uncertainty. "I'm waiting, Mr. Podgers," he said. "We are all waiting," cried Lady Windermere, in her quick, impassioned manner, but the cheiromantist made no reply. "I believe Arthur is going on the stage," said Lady Jedburgh, "and that, after scolding Mr. Podgers, is afraid to tell him so." Suddenly, Mr. Podgers dropped Lord Arthur's right hand, and seized hold of his left, bending down so low examined it that the gold trims of his spectacles seemed almost to touch the palm. For a moment his face became a white mask of horror, but he soon recovered his sang-froid, and looking up at Lady Windermere, said with a forced smile, "It is the hand of a charming young man." "Of course it is," answered Lady Windermere, "but will he be a charming husband? That is what I want to know." "All charming young men are," said Mr. Podgers. "I don't think a husband should be too fascinating," murmured Lady Jedburgh pensively. "It is so dangerous, my dear child. "They never are too fascinating," cried Lady Windermere. "But one I want are the tales. The tales are the only thing that interests. What is going to happen to Lord Arthur?" "Well, within the next few months Lord Arthur will go a voyage." "Oh yes, his honeymoon, of course, and lose a relative." "Not his sister, I hope," said Lady Jedburgh in a piteous tone of voice. "Certainly not his sister," answered Mr. Podgers with a disparating wave of the hand. "A distant relative merrily."
"Well, I'm dreadfully disappointed," said Lady Windermere. "I have absolutely nothing to tell Savile tomorrow. No one cared about distant relatives nowadays. They were out of fashion years ago. However, I suppose he had better have Betsy by her. It's always just for change, you know. And now let us go to supper. They are sure to have eaten everything up, but we may find some hot soup. Franco used to make excellent soup once, but he is so agitated about politics and present that I never feel quite certain about him. I do wish General Boulanger will keep quiet. Duchess, I am sure you are tired." "Not at all, dear Gladys," answered the Duchess, walking toward the door. "I have enjoyed myself immensely, and the the Cheromantis is most interesting. Flora, where can my tortoise cellophane be?" "Oh, thank you, Sir Thomas, so much. And my last swell, Flora?" "Oh, thank you, Sir Thomas, very kind, I'm sure." And the worthy creature finally managed to get downstairs without dropping her scent bottle more than twice. All this time, Lord Arthur Savile had remained standing by the fireplace, with the same feeling of dread over him, the same sickening sense of coming evil. He smiled sadly at his sister as she swept past him on light blim-bam-tailed arms, looking lovely in her pink brocade and pearls, and he hardly heard Lady Windermere when she called to him to follow her. He thought of Sybil Merton, and the idea that anything could come between them made his eyes dim with tears. Looking at him, one would have said that Nemesis had stolen the child of Pallas and shown him the Jordan head. He seemed turned to stone, and his face was like marble in its melancholy. He had lived in the delicate and luxurious life of young men, of birth and fortune, a life exquisite in its freedom from sordid care, its beautiful poise in sunshine, and now for the first time he became conscious of the terrible of destiny, of the awful meaning of doom. How mad and monstrous it all seemed. Could it be that written on his hand, in character that he could not read himself, but that another could decipher, was some fearful secret of sin, some blood-red sign of crime? Was there no escape possible? Were we no better than the judgment, moved by an unseen power, vision the border fashion at his fancy for honor or for shame? His reason revolts against, and yet he felt that some tragedy was hanging over them, and he had been suddenly called upon to bear an intolerable burden. Actors are so fortunate, they can choose whether they will appear in tragedy or in comedy, whether they will suffer or make merry, laugh, and shed tears. But in real life, it is different. Most men and women are forced to perform parts for which they have no qualification. Our Guildenstern play Hamlet for us, and our Hamlet have to jest like a prince hall. The word is at stake, but the play is badly cast. Suddenly, Mr. Potter entered the room. When he saw Lord Arthur, he started, and his coarse, fat face became a sort of greenish yellow color. The two men's eyes met, and for a moment there was silence. "The Duchess has left one of her clothes. Lord Arthur had asked me to bring it to her," said Mr. Potter finally. "Ah, I see it on the sofa. Good evening." "Mr. Potter, I must insist on you giving me a straightforward answer to a question I'm going to put to you." "Another time, Lord Arthur, but the Duchess is anxious. I'm afraid I must go." "You shall not go. The Duchess is in no hurry." "Ladies shall not be kept waiting, Lord Arthur," said Mr. Potter, with his sickly smile. "The fireside is apt to be impatient." Lord Arthur's finely chiseled lips curled in petulant disdain. The poor Duchess seemed to him of very little importance at the moment. He walked across the room to where Mr. Potter was standing, and held his hand out. "Tell me what you say there," he said. "Tell me the truth. I must know it. I'm not a child." Mr. Potter's eyes blinked behind his gold-rimmed spectacles, and he moved uneasily from one foot to the other, while his finger played nervously with a flash watch chain. "What makes you think that I'll say anything in your hand, Lord Arthur? More than I'll tell you. I know you did, and I insist on your telling me that what it was. I will pay you. I will give you a check for £100. The green eyes flashed for a moment, and then became dull again. "Guinness?" said Mr. Potter at last, in a low voice. "Certainly, I will send you a check tomorrow. What is your club?" "I have no club. That is to say, not just a prison. My address is... But allow me to give you a card." And producing a bit of gel-edged passport from his waistcoat pocket, Mr. Potter handed it with a low bow to Lord Arthur, who read out, "Mr. Septimus R. Potter, Professionalis Cheromantis, 103A West Mount Street." "My hosts are from then too far," murmured Mr. Potter mechanically, "and I make a reduction for families." "Be quick!" cried Lord Arthur, looking very pale and holding his hand out. Mr. Potter glanced nervously round and drew the heavy portiere across the door. "It will take a little time, Lord Arthur. You had better to sit down." "Be quick, sire!" cried Lord Arthur again, stamping his foot angrily on the polished floor. Mr. Potter smiled, drew from his breast pocket a small magnifying glass, and waved it carefully with his handkerchief. "I'm quite ready," he said. Chapter 2. 10 minutes later, with face blinded by terror and eyes wild with grief, Lord Arthur Savile rushes from Petting House, crossing his way through the crowd of fur-coated footmen that stood round the large-striped awning, and seeming not to see or hear anything. The night was bitter cold, and the gas lamp round the square flared and flickered in the keen wind, but his hands were hot with fever, and his forehead burned like a fire. On and on he went, almost with the gait of drunken men. A policeman looked curiously at him as he passed, and a beggar who sauntered from an archway to ask for alms grew frightened, saying misery greater than his own. Once he stopped under a lamp and looked at his hand. He thought he could detect the paint of blood already upon them, and a faint cry broke from his trembling lips. "Murder!" That is what the Cheromantis had sent there. "Murder! The very neck seemed to know it, and the desolate whined to haul it is in here. The dark corners of the street were full of it. It grinned at him from the roof of the house. First he came to the park, whose sombre woodland seemed to fascinate him. He leaned wearily up against the railing, cooling his brow against the wet metal, and listening to the tremulous silence of the street. "Murder! Murder!" he kept repeating, as stock iteration could dim the horror of the wood. The sound of his own voice made him shudder, yet he almost hoped the echo might hear him and wake the slumbering city from his dream. He felt a mad desire to stop the casual passer-by and tell him everything. Then he wandered across Oxford Street into narrow, shamefully alley. Two women with painted faces mocked at him as he went by. From a dark courtyard came a sound of oaths and blows, followed by a shrill scream, and 100 upon a damp doorstep he saw the crook packet from of poverty and ill. A strange pity came over him. Were the children of sin and misery predestined to their end, as he had to his? Were they, like him, merely the puppet of a monstrous soul? And yet it was not the mystery, but the comedy of suffering that struck him. Its absolutely uselessness, its grotesque want of meaning, how incoherent everything seemed, how lacking in all harmony. He was amazed at the discord between the shallow optimism of the day and the real fact of existence. He was still very young. After a time, he found himself in front of Marylebone Church. The silent roadway looked like a long ribbon of polished silver, flecked here and there by the dark arabesques of waving shadow. Far into the distance curved the land of flickering gas lamps, and outside a little walled-in house stood a solitary hansom, the driver asleep inside. He walked hastily in the direction of Portland Place, now and then looking round as though he feared that he was being followed. At the corner of Reed Street stood two men, reading a small bill upon a hoarding. An odd feeling of curiosity stirred him, and he crossed over. As he came near, the word "murder" printed in black letter with his eyes. He stared, and a deep flush came into his cheek. It was an advertisement offering a reward for any information leading to the arrest of a man of medium height, between 30 and 40 years of age, wearing a billycock hat, a black coat, and check trousers, and with a scar upon his right cheek. He read it over and over again, and wondered if the wretched man would be caught, and how he had been scared. Perhaps some day his own name might be replaced on the wall of London. Some day, perhaps, a price will be set on his head also. The thought made him sick with horror. He turned on his heel and hurried on into the night. Where he went he hardly knew. He had a dim memory of wandering through a labyrinth of sordid houses, of being lost in a giant web of sombre streets, and it was breakdown when he found himself at last in Piccadilly Circus. As he strolled home toward Belgrave Square, he met the great wagon on their way to Covent Garden. The white smoked carters, with their pleasant sunburned faces and coarse curly hair, strode sturdily on, cracking their whips and calling out now and then to each other. On the back of a huge grey horse, the leader of a jangling team, sat a chubby boy with a bunch of primrose in his battery hat, keeping tight hold of the man with his little hands and longing at the great piles of vegetable looked like masses of jet against the morning sky, like masses of green jet against the pink petal of some marvelous rose. Lord Arthur felt curiously affected. He could not tell why. There was something in the dawn's delicate loveliness that seemed to him inexpressibly pathetic, and he thought of all in the day that bring him beauty, that sat in storm. These rustic, too, with their rock, good-humoured voice and their nonchalant ways, what a strange London they saw! A London free from the sign of night and the smoke of day, a pallid, ghost-like city, a desolate town of tombs. He wondered what they took of it, and whether they knew anything of its splendor and its shame, of its fierce, fairy-colored joys and its horrible hunger, of all it makes a march from morn to eve. Probably it was to them merely a mart where they broke their fruit to sell, and where they tarried for a few hours at most, leaving the street still silent, the houses still asleep. It gave him pleasure to watch them as they went by. Rude as they were, with their heavy home-knitted shoes and their awkward gait, they brought a little of variety with them. He felt that they had lived with nature, and that she had taught them peace. He envied them all they did not know. By the time he had reached Belgrave Square, the sky was a flame blue, and the birds were beginning to twitter in the garden. Chapter 3. When Lord Arthur woke, it was 12 o'clock, and the misty sun was streaming through the ivory shade curtain of his room. He got up and looked out the window. A dim haze of heat was hanging over the great city, and the roofs of the houses were like dull silver. In the flickering green of the square below, some children were flitting about like white butterflies, and the pavement was crowded with people on their way to the park. Never had life seemed lovely to him. Never had the thing of evil seemed more remote. Then his valet brought him a cup of chocolate on a tray. After he had drunk it, he dragged a set of heavy portiere of peach-colored plush, and passed into the bedroom. The light stole softly from above, through thin slabs of transparent onyx, and the water in the marble tank glimmered like a moonstone. He plunged hastily in till the cool ribs touched throat and hair, and then dipped his head right under, as though he would have wiped away the stain of some shameful memory. When he stepped out, he felt almost at peace. The aqueous physical condition of the moment had dominated him, as indeed often happened in the case of very finely worked nature, for the sense, like fire, can purify as well as destroy. After breakfast, he flung himself down on the divan and lit a cigarette. On the mantel-shelf, framed in dainty old brocade, stood a large photograph of Savile Merton, as he had seen her first at Lady Noel's ball. The small, exquisitely shaped head drooped slightly to one side, as took the thin, red like crude, cold-hard beard that burdened so much beauty. The lips were slightly parched, and seemed made for sweet music, and all the tender purity of girlhood looked out in wonder from the dreaming eyes. With her soft, clinging dress of crepe de chine and her light leaf-shaped vine, she looked like one of those delicate little figure men find in the olive woods near Tanagra. And there was a touch of Greek grace in her pose and attitude. Yet she was not pitied. She was simply perfect, proportionate, a rare thing in an age when so many women are either over life-size or insignificant. Now, as Lord Arthur looked at her, he was filled with the terrible pity that is born of love. He felt that to marry her, with the doom of murder hanging over his head, would be a betrayal like that of Judas, a sign worse than any the Borgia had ever dreamed of. What happiness could there be for them? What at any moment he might be called upon to carry out the awful prophecy written in his hand? What manner of life would be theirs while fate still held this fearful fortune in the scales? The marriage must be postponed at all costs. Of this he was quite resolved. Ardently, so he loved the girl, and the mere thoughts of his finger when they sat together made each nerve of his body thrill with exquisite joy. He recognized none the less clearly where his duty lay, and was fully conscious of the fact that he had no right to marry until he had committed the murder. This dawn he could stand before the altar with Savile Merton, and give his life into her hands without terror of wrongdoing. This dawn he could take her to his arms, knowing that she would never have to blush for him, never have to hang her head in shame. But dawn it must be first, and the sooner the better for both. Many men in his position would have preferred the primrose path of dalliance to the step-head of duty, but Lord Arthur was too conscientious to set pleasure above principle. There was more passion in his love, and Savile was to him a symbol of all that is good and noble. For a moment he had a natural repugnance against what he was asked to do, but it soon passed away. He had told him that it was not a sin but a sacrifice. His reason reminded him that there was no other course open. He had to choose between living for himself and living for others. And terrible thought the test light upon him under bodily woes, yet he knew that he must not suffer selfishness to triumph over love. Sooner or later we are all called upon to decide on the same issues of us all, the same question he asked. To Lord Arthur it came early in life, before his nature had been spoiled by the calculating cynicism of middle age, or his heart corroded by the shallow, fashionable egotism of our day, and he felt no hesitation about doing his duty. Fortunately also for him, he was no mere dreamer or idle intellect. Had been made so, he would have hesitated like Hamlet, and let resolution mark his purpose. But he was essentially practical, left to him in action rather than thought. He had the rarest all-overthing common sense. The well-turbid feelings of the previous night had by this time completely passed away, and it was almost with a sense of shame that he looked back upon his mad wanderings from street to street. His first emotional agony, the very sincerity of his sufferings made them seem unreal to him now. He wondered how he could have been so foolish as to rant and rave about the inevitable. The only question that seemed to trouble him was whom to make way before he was to apply to the victim murder. Like the religion of the pagan world requires a victim as well as a priest. Not being genius, he had no enemies, and indeed he felt that his was not the time for the gravitation of any personal grudge or dislike. The mission in which he was injured by one of great and grave solemnity. He accordingly made out a list of his friends and relatives on a sheet of notepaper, and after careful consideration decided in favor of Lady Clementina Belham, a dear old lady who lived in Curzon Street and was his own second cousin by his mother's side. He had always been very fond of Lady Clem, as everyone called her, and as he was forwarded himself, having come into Old Rugby properly when he came of age, there was no possibility of his deriving any vulgar monetary advantage by her death. In fact, the more he thought over the matter, the more she seems to him to be just the right person, and feeling that any delay would be unfair to Savile, he determined to make his arrangements at once. The first thing to be done was, of course, to settle with the Romantics, so he sat down at a small Sheraton reading table that stood near the window, tore a cake for £105, payable to the order of Mr. Samptius Bodgers, and on closing it in an envelope, told his fellow to take it to Westmont Street. He then telephoned to the steps for his hansom and tried to go out. As he was leaving the room, he looked back at Savile Merchant's photograph and swore that at home that way he would never let her know what he was doing for her sake, but would keep the secret of his self-service hidden always in his heart. On his way to Bochum, he stopped at Florist and sent Savile a beautiful basket of nurses, with lovely white tinsel and starting pen's eyes, and on arriving at the club, went straight to the library, rang the bell, and ordered the waiter to bring him a lemon and soda and a book of toxicology. He had fully decided that poison was the best means to attack in his troublesome business. Anything like personal violence was extremely distasteful to him, and besides he was very anxious to the murder Lady Clementina in any way that might attract public attention, as he had the idea of being liaison of Lady Windermere's, of seeing his name figuring in the paragraph of vulgar society newspapers. He had also to think of Savile's fathers and mothers, who were rather old-fashioned people and might possibly object to the marriage if there was anything like scandal, though he felt certain that if he told them the whole fact of this case, they would be the very first to appreciate the motives that had actuated him. He had every reason, then, to decide in favor of poison. It was safe, sure, and quiet, and did away with any necessity for painful usage, to which, like most Englishmen, he had a rude objection. Of the science of poison, however, he knew absolutely nothing, and the waiter seems quite unable to find anything in the library but Ruth's Guide and Bell's magazine. He examined the bookshelves himself, and finally came across a handsomely bound edition of the Pharmacopoeia in a copy of St. Toxicology, edited by Martha Wright, the president of the Royal College of Physicians and one of the oldest members of the Bochum, having been elected in a mistake for somebody else, a concept that so incurred the commit that when the real man came up, they blackballed him anonymously. Lord Arthur was a good deal puzzled by the technical term used in the both books, and had begun to regret that he had not paid more attention to his classic at Oxford, when in the second volume of Erskine he found a very interesting and complete account of the probation of a candidate, written in fairly clear English. It seems to him to be exactly the poison he wanted. It was sweetened, almost immediate in this effect, perfectly painless, and when taken in the form of a gelatin capsule, the mode recommended by Sir Meadow, not by any means unpalatable. He accordingly made a note upon his short cuff of the amount necessary of a fatal dose, put the books back in their place, and strolled up St. James Street to bless and homage the great semester. Mr. Pessel, who always attended personally on the aristocracy, was a good deal surprised at that order, and in very deferential manner murmured something about a medical certificate being necessary. However, as soon as Lord Arthur explained to him that it was for a large Norwegian Mastiff that he was obliged to get rid of as a sure sign of inspiring rabies, and had already bidden to a coachman twice in the calf of the ledge, he expressed himself as being perfectly satisfied to compliment Lord Arthur on his wonderful knowledge of toxicology, and had the prescription made in immediately. Lord Arthur put the capsule into a pretty little silver bumbox that he saw in a shop window in Bond Street, threw away Pestle and Hamby ugly pillbox, and drove off at once to Lady Clementina's. Well, Monsieur le Massacre, cried the old lady as he entered the room. Why have not you been to see me all this time? My dear Lady Clem, I never had a moment to myself, said Lord Arthur, smiling. I suppose you mean that you go up all day long with Miss Savile Merchant, buying sevens and talking nonsense? I cannot understand why people make such a fuss about being married. In my day, we never dreamed of feeling and cooking in public, or in private for the matter. I assure you, I have not seen Savile for 24 hours, Lady Slim. As far as I can make out, she belongs entirely to her milliners. Of course, that is the only reason you come to see an ugly old man like myself. I wonder you mean don't take warning on a fight this foolish for moi, and where I am, a poor rheumatic creature with a face front and a bad member. Why, if I were not for dear Lady Johnson, who sends me all the worst French novels she can find, I don't think I could get through the day. Doctors are not used at all, except to get a free out of one. They can't even cure my heartburn. I have brought you a cure for that, Lady Slim, said Lord Arthur gravely. It is a wonderful thing invented by an American. I don't think I like American invitation for Arthur. I'm quite sure I don't. I read some American novels lately and they were quite sensational. Oh, but there is no sense all about this, Lady Slim. I assure you it is a perfect cure. You must promise to try it. And Lord Arthur brought the little box out of his pocket and handed it to her. Well, the box is charming, Arthur. Is it really a present? That is a very sweet of you, and it is the wonderful medicine. It looks like a bonbon. I'll take it at once. Good heavens, Lady Slim, cried Lord Arthur, catching hold of her hand. You must not do anything of the kind. It is a homeopathic medicine, and if you take it without having a heartburn, it might do you no harm. Wait till you have an attack and take it then. You will be nostalgic and the result. I should like to take it now, said Lady Slamantina, holding up to the little transparent capsule with its floating bubble of liquid content. I'm sure it is delicious. The fact is that, though I hate doctors, I love medicines. However, I'll keep it till my next attack. And when will that be? Asked Lord Arthur eagerly. Will it be soon? I have not for a week. I had a very bad time yesterday morning with it, but one never knows. You were sure to have one before end of month, then Lady Slim? I am afraid so, but how sympathetic you are today, Arthur. Really, Savile has done you a great deal of good, and now you must run away, for I am dealing with some very tall people who wanna talk scandal, and I know that if I don't get my sleep now, I shall never be able to keep awake during dinner. Goodbye, Arthur. Give my love to Savile, and thank you so much for the American medicines. You won't forget to take it, Lady Sam, will you? Said Lord Arthur, rising from his seat. Of course I won't. You silly boy. I think it most kind of you to think of me, and I shall write and tell you if I want to any more. Lord Arthur left the house in high spirits and with a feeling of immense relief. The night he had an interview with Savile Merton, he told him now he had been suddenly placed in a position of terrible difficulty from which neither now nor Judy would allow him to recede. He told her that the marriage must be pure of her the present, as until he had carried off his fearful enslavement, he was not a free man. He implored her to trust him and not to have any thoughts about the future. Everything would come right, but patience was necessary. The scene took place in the conservatory of Mr. Merton's house in Park Lane, where Lord Arthur had dined as usual. Savile had never seemed more happy, and for a moment Lord Arthur had been tempted to play the coward's part, to write to Lady Slamantina for the bill, and to let the marriage go on as if there was no such person as Mr. Podgers in the world. His better nature, however, soon asserted itself, and even when Savile flung herself weeping into his arms, he did not falter. The beauty that starred his sense had touched his conscience. Also, he felt that the wreck, so far alive of the sake of a few minutes' pleasure, would be a wrong thing to do. He stayed with Savile till nearly midnight, comforting her and being comforted in turn, and early the next morning he left for Venice after writing Amelie for a letter to Mr. Merton about the necessary postponement of the marriage. Chapter 4. In Venice he met his brother Lord Bursiton, who happened to have come over from Corfu in his yacht. The two young men spent a delightful fortnight together. In the morning they rode on the Lido, or glided up and down the green canals in their long black gondola. In the afternoon they usually entertained visitors on the yacht. And in the evening they met a Florian and smoked memorable acorns on the piazza. Yet somehow Lord Arthur was not happy. Every day he studied the obituary column in the Times, expecting to see a notice of Lady Clementina's death, but every day he was disappointed. He began to be afraid that some accident had happened to her, and often regretted that he had prevented her taking the annuitive when she said he had been anxious to try its effect. Siby's letters, too thoughtful love, trust, and tenders, were often very sad in their tone, and sometimes he used to think that he was parted from her forever. After a fortnight, Lord sojourned her Bournemouth with a Venice, and determined to run down the coast of Ravenna as he heard that there was some capital cocks shooting in the Pyrenees. Lord Arthur at first refused absolutely to come, but Surbiton, of whom he was extremely fond, finally persuaded him that if he stayed at Daniels by himself, he would be mobbed to death. And one the morning of the 15th day start, with a strong northeast wind blowing and a rather cloudy sea. The sport was excellent, and the free open-air laugh brought the color back to Lord Arthur's cheek. But about the 22, he became anxious about Lady Clementina, and in spite of Surbiton's remonstrance, came back to Venice by train.
I suppose you mean that you go about all day long with Miss Savile Merton, buying chiffons and talking nonsense? I cannot understand why people make such a fuss about being married. In my day, we never dreamed of peeling and cold showing in public or in private for that matter. I assure you I have not seen Savile for 24 hours. The lady declared. As far as I can make out, she belonged entirely to her millionaires. Of course, this is the only reason you come to see an ugly old woman like myself. I wonder you mean don't take warning on a fight that's foolish for mine and her. I am a poor rheumatic creature with a false front and a bad temper. Why, if it were not for dear Lady Johnson, who sends me all the worst French novels she can find, I don't think I could get through the day. Doctor are no use at all except to get face out of one. They cannot even cure my heartburn. I have brown cure for the Lady Clem, said Lord Arthur gravely. It is a wonderful thing invented by an American. I don't think I like American inventions, Arthur. I'm quite sure I don't. I read some American novels lately, and they were quite nonsensical. Oh, but there is no nonsense at all about this Lady Clem. I assure you it is a perfect cure. You must promise to try it. And Lord Arthur brought the little box out of his pocket and handed it to her. Well, the box is charming, Arthur. Is it really a present? It is very sweet of you. And is this the wonderful medicine? It looks like a bonbon. I'll take it at once. Good heavens, Lady Clem, cried Lord Arthur, catching hold of her hand. You must do anything of the kind. It is a homeopathic medicine, and if you take it without having heartburn, it might do you no harm. Wait till you have an attack and take it then. You will be astonished at the result. I should like to take it now, sighed Lady Clementine, holding up to the light the little transparent capsule with its floating bubble of liquid aconitine. I'm sure it is delicious. The fact is that though I hate doctors, I love medicines. However, I'll keep it till my next attack. And when will that be? Asked Lord Arthur eagerly. Will it be soon? I hope not for a week. I had a very bad time yesterday morning with it, but one never knows. You are sure to have one before the end of the month, landlady claimed. I'm afraid so. But how sympathetic you are today, Arthur. Really, Savile has done you a great deal of good. And now you must run away, for I'm dining with some very dull people who want talk scandal, and I know that if I don't get my sleep now, I shall never be able to keep awake during dinner. Goodbye, Arthur. Give my love to Savile, and thank you so much for the American medicine. You won't forget to take it, Lady Clem, will you? Said Arthur, rising from his seat. Of course I won't, you silly boy. I think it is most kind of you to think of me, and I shall write and tell you if I want any more. Lord Arthur left the house in high spirits and with a feeling of immense relief. That night he had an interview with Savile Merton. He told her how he had been suddenly placed in a position of terrible difficulty, from which neither Hanover nor duty would allow him to be saved. He told her that the marriage must be put off for the present, as until he had got rid of his fearful entanglement he was not a free man. He implored her to trust him and not to have any doubts about the future. Everything would come right, but patience was necessary. The scene took place in the conservatory of Mr. Merton's house in Park Lane, where Lord Arthur had dined as usual. Savile had never seemed more happy, and for a moment Lord Arthur had been tempted to play the coward's part, to write to Lady Clementine for the bill, and to let the marriage go on as if there was no such person as Mr. Podgers in the world. His better nature, however, soon asserted itself, and even when Savile flung herself weeping into his arms, he did not falter. The beauty that stirred his senses had touched his conscience also. He felt that to break so fire a leaf for the sake of a few months' pleasure would be a wrong thing to do. He stayed with Savile till nearly midnight, comforting her and being comforted in turn, and early the next morning he left for Venice after writing a manly, firm letter to Mr. Merton about the necessary postponement of the marriage. In Venice, they met his brother, Lord Surbiton, who happened to have come over from Corfu in his yacht. The two young men spent a delightful fortnight together. In the morning they rode on the Lido, or glided up and down the green canals in their long black gondola. In the afternoon they usually entertained visitors on the yacht, and in the evening they dined at Florian's and smoked innumerable cigarettes on the piazza. Yet somehow Lord Arthur was not happy. Every day he studied the obituary column in the Times, expecting to see a notice of Lady Clementine's death, but every day he was disappointed. He began to be afraid that some accident had happened to her, and often regretted that he had prevented her taking the aconitine when she had been so anxious to try its effect. Savile's letters to town, full of love and trust and tenderness, were often very sad in their tone, and sometimes he used to think that he was parted from her forever. After a fortnight, Lord Surbiton could part with Venice and determined to run down the coast to Ravenna, as he heard that there was some capital cook shooting in the Benetton. Lord Arthur at first refused absolutely to come, but Surbiton, of whom he was extremely fond, finally persuaded him that if he stayed at Daniel's by himself, he would be moved to death, and on the morning of the 15th they started with a strong northeast wind blowing and rather copy. The sport was excellent and the free open air life brought the color back to Lord Arthur's cheek. But about the 22 he came anxious about Lady Clementina, and in spite of Surbiton's remonstrances came back to Venice by train. As he stepped out of his gondola on the hotel steps, the proprietress came forward to meet him with a sheaf of telegrams. Lord Arthur snatched them out of his hand and tore them open. Everything had been successful. Lady Clementina had died quite suddenly on the night of the 17th. His first thought was for Savile, and he sent her off a telegram announcing his immediate return to London. He then ordered his valet to pack his things for their night mile, sent his gondoliers about 5 times the proper fire, and ran up to his sitting room with legs stiff and buoyant heart. There he found 3 letters waiting for him. One was from Savile herself, full of sympathy and condolence. The others were from his mother and from Lady Clementina's solicitor. It seemed that the old lady had dined with the Duchess that very night, had delighted everyone by her wit and spirit, but had gone somewhat early, complaining of heartburn. In the morning she was found dead in her bed, having apparently suffered no pain. Sir Meteorite had been sent for at once, but of course there was nothing to be done, and she was to be buried on the 22nd, become skull-coat. A few days before she died, she had met her fate and left Lord Arthur her little house in Curzon Street, and whole furniture, personal effects, and pictures, with the exception of her collection of miniatures, which was to go to her sister, Lady Margaret Crawford, and her amethyst necklace, which Savile Merton was to have. The property was not of much value, but Mr. Mansfield, the solicitor, was extremely anxious for Lord Arthur to return at once. Mr. Mansfield, if possible, as there were a great many bills to be paid, and Lady Clementine had never kept any regular accounts. Lord Arthur was very much touched by Lady Clementine's kind remembrance of him and felt that Mr. Podgers had great deal to answer for his love of Savile. However, dominates every other emotion at the consciousness that he had done his duty gave him peace and comfort. When he arrived at Charing Cross, he felt perfectly happy. The Mertons received him very kindly. Savile made him promise that he would never again allow anything to come between them, and the marriage was fixed for the 7th June. Life seemed to him much more bright and beautiful, and all his old gladness came back to him again. One day, however, as he was going over the house in Curzon Street in company with Lady Clementina's solicitor and Savile herself, burning packages of faded letters and turning out drawers of old rubbish, The young girl suddenly gave a little cry of delight. "What have you sold me, fond Sybil?" said Lord Arthur, looking up from his work and smiling. "This lovely little silver-bound pony, Arthur, isn't it quite and Dutch? Do give it to me. I know appetites won't become me till I'm over 80. It was the books that had held the astonishing." Lord Arthur started, and a fine place came into his cheek. He had almost entirely forgotten what he had done, and it seemed to him a curious coincidence that Savile, for whose sake he had gone through all that terrible anxiety, should have been the first to remind him of it. "Of course you can have it, Savile. I gave it to poor Lady Clemm myself." "Oh, thank you, Arthur. And may I have the bonbon too? I had no notion that Lady Clementine liked sweets. I thought she was far too intellectual." Lord Arthur greatly proud. An horrible idea crossed his mind. "Bonbon, Savile? What do you mean?" he sighed in a slow, harsh voice. "There is one in it, that is all. It looks quite old and dusty, and I have not the slightest intention of eating it. What is the matter, Arthur?" "How would you look?" Lord Arthur rushed across the room and seized the box. Inside it was the amber-colored capsule with its poison bubble. Lady Clementine had died a natural death after all. The shock of the discovery was almost too much for him. He flung the capsule into the fire and sank on the sofa with a cry of despair. Mr. Merton was a good deal distressed at the second postponement of the marriage, and Lady Julia, who had already ordered her dress for the wedding, did all in her power to make Savile pray of the match. Truly, however, as Savile loved her mother, she would give her whole life into Lord Arthur's hands, and nothing that Lady Julia could say could make her waver in her faith. As for Lord Arthur himself, it took him days to get over his terrible disappointment, and for a time his nerves were completely unstrung. His excellent common sense, however, soon asserted itself, and his sound practical mind did not leave him long in doubt about what to do. Poison having proved a complete failure, dynamite or some other form of explosive was obviously the proper thing to try. He accordingly looked again over the list of his friends and relatives, and after careful consideration determined to blow up his uncle, the Dean of Chichester. The Dean, who was a man of great culture and learning, was extremely fond of clocks, and had a wonderful collection of timepieces, ranging from the 15th century to the present day, and it seemed to Lord Arthur that this hobby of the good deans offered him an excellent opportunity for carrying out his scheme. Where to purchase an explosive machine was, of course, quite another matter. The London Directory gave him no information on the point, and he felt that there was very little use in going to Scotland Yard about it, as they never seemed to know anything about the movements of the dynamite faction till after an explosion had taken place, and not much even then. Suddenly, the tongue of his friend Raufalov, a young Russian of very revolutionary tendencies, whom he had met at Lady Vandermeer's in the winter. Count Raufalov was supposed to be writing a life of Peter the Great, and to have come over to England for the purpose of studying the documents relating to the Tsar's residence. in this country as a ship carpenter, but it was generally suspected that he was a nihilist agent, and there was no doubt that the Russian embassy did not look with any favor upon his presence in London. Lord Arthur felt that he was just the man for his purpose and drove down one morning to his lodgings in Bloomsbury to ask his advice and assistance. "So, you are taking up politics seriously?" sighed Konravolov, when Lord Arthur had told him the object of his mission. But Lord Arthur, who had swagger of any kind, felt bound to admit to him that he had not the slightest interest in social questions, and simply wanted the explosive machine for a purely family matter in which no one was concerned but himself. Count Rovalov looked at him for some moments in amazement, and then, saying that he was quite serious, wrote an address on the piece of paper, initialed it, and handed it to him across the table. Scotland Yard would give a good deal to know this address, my dear fellow." "They should not have it," cried Lord Arthur, "ha ha ha," laughing, and after shaking the young Raden warmly by the hand, he ran downstairs, examined the paper, and told the coachman to drive to Soho Square. There he dismissed him and strolled down Craig Street till he came to a place called Palace Court. He passed under the archway and found himself in Corey's cool visage that was apparently occupied by a French laundry, as a perfect network of clotheslines was stretched across from house to house, and there was a flutter of white linen in the morning air. He walked right to the end and knocked at a little greenhouse. After some delay, during which every window in the court became a blurred mass of peering faces, the door was opened by a rather rogue looking foreigner, who asked him in very bad English what his business was. Lord Arthur handed him the paper Count Rovalov had given him. When the man saw it, he bowed and invited Lord Arthur into a very shabby front parlour on the ground floor, and in a few moments Herr Winkelkopf, as he was called in England, bustled into the room, with a very Weinstein napkin round his neck and a frog in his left hand. "Konravolov has given me an introduction to you," said Lord Arthur, bowing, "and I am anxious to have a short interview with you on a matter of business. My name is Smith, Mr. Robert Smith, and I want you to supply me with an explosive cloak." "Charmed to meet you, Lord Arthur," said the genial little German, laughing. "Don't look so alarmed. It is my duty to know everybody, and I remember seeing you one evening at Lady Windermere's. I hope her ladyship is quite well. Do you mind sitting with me while I finish my breakfast? There is an excellent bed, and my friends are kind enough to say that my raiment is better than any they get at the German embassy." And before Lord Arthur had got over his surprise at being recognized, he found himself seated in the back room, sipping the most delicious Marco-Brenner out of a pale yellow hourglass marked with the imperial monogram and catching in the friendliest manner possible to the famous conspirator, and to let the marriage go on as if there was no such person as Mr. Podgers in the world. His better nature, however, soon asserted itself, and even when Savile flung herself weeping into his arms, he did not falter. The beauty that stirred his senses had touched his conscience also. He felt that to break so fire a leaf for the sake of a few months' pleasure would be a wrong thing to do. He stayed with Savile till nearly midnight, comforting her and being comforted in turn, and early the next morning he left for Venice after writing a many firm letter to Mr. Merton about the necessary postponement of the marriage. In Venice, they met his brother, Lord Surbiton, who happened to have come over from Corfu in his yacht. The two young men spent a delightful fortnight together. In the morning they rode on the Lido, or glided up and down the green canals in their long black gondola. In the afternoon they usually entertained visitors on the yacht, and in the evening they dined at Florian's and smoked innumerable cigarettes on the piazza. Yet somehow Lord Arthur was not happy. Every day he studied the obituary column in the Times, expecting to see a notice of Lady Clementina's death, but every day he was disappointed. He began to be afraid that some accident had happened to her, and often regretted that he had prevented her taking the Aswanitine when she had been so anxious to try its effect. Savile's letters to town, full of love and trust and tenderness, were often very sad in their tone, and sometimes he used to think that he was parted from her forever. After a fortnight, Lord Surbiton could part with Venice, and determined to run down the coast to Ravenna, as he heard that there was some capital cook shooting in the Benetton. Lord Arthur at first refused absolutely to come, but Surbiton, of whom he was extremely fond, finally persuaded him that if he stayed at Daniel's by himself, he would be moved to death, and on the morning of the 15th they started with a strong northeast wind blowing and rather copy. The sport was excellent, and the free, open air life brought the color back to Lord Arthur's cheek. But about the 22 he came anxious about Lady Clementina, and in spite of Surbiton's remonstrances came back to Venice by train. As he stepped out of his gondola on the hotel steps, the proprietress came forward to meet him with a sheaf of telegrams. Lord Arthur snatched them out of his hand and tore them open. Everything had been successful. Lady Clementina had died quite suddenly on the night of the 17th. His first thought was for Savile, and he sent her off a telegram announcing his immediate return to London. He then ordered his valet to pack his things for their night mile, sent his gondoliers about 5 times the proper fire, and ran up to his sitting room with a light step and buoyant heart. There he found 3 letters waiting for him. One was from Savile herself, full of sympathy and condolence. The others were from his mother and from Lady Clementina's solicitor. It seemed that the old lady had dined with the Duchess that very night, had delighted everyone by her wit and spirit, but had gone somewhat early, complaining of heartburn. In the morning she was found dead in her bed, having apparently suffered no pain. Sir Margaret had been sent for at once. But of course, there was nothing to be done, and she was to be buried on the 22 becomes Calcutta. A few days before she did, she had met her fellow and left Lord Arthur her little house in Curzon Street, and all furniture, personal effects, and pictures, with the exception of her collection of miniatures, which was to go to her sister, Lady Margaret Bradford, and her amethyst necklace, which Savile Merton was to have. The property was not of much value, but Mr. Mansfield, the solicitor, was extremely anxious for Lord Arthur to return at once. Mr. Mansfield, if possible, as there were a great many bills to be paid, and Lady Clementine had never kept any regular accounts. Lord Arthur was very much touched by Lady Clementine's kind remembrance of him and felt that Mr. Podgers had great deal to answer for his love of Savile. However, dominates every other emotion at the consciousness that he had done his duty gave him peace and comfort. When he arrived at Charing Cross, he felt perfectly happy. The Mertons received him very kindly. Savile made him promise that he would never again allow anything to come between them, and the marriage was fixed for the 7th June. Live seemed to him much more bright and beautiful, and all his old gladness came back to him again. One day, however, as he was going over the house in Curzon Street in company with Lady Clementine's solicitor and Savile herself, burning packages of faded letters and turning out drawers of old rubbish, the young girl suddenly gave a little cry of delight. "What have you sold, fond Savile?" said Lord Arthur, looking up from his work and smiling. "This lovely little silver bonbonniere, Arthur, is not quite and Dutch. Do give it to me. I know amethyst won't become me till I'm over 80. It was the books that had held the astonishing." Lord Arthur started, and fine place came into his cheek. He had almost entirely forgotten what he had done, and it seemed to him a curious coincidence that Savile, for whose sake he had gone through all that terrible anxiety, should have been the first to remind him of it. "Of course you can have it, Savile. I gave it to poor Lady Clementine myself." "Oh, thank you, Arthur. And may I have the bonbon too? I had no notion that Lady Clementine liked sweets. I thought she was far too intellectual." Lord Arthur greatly proud. An horrible idea crossed his mind. "Bonbon, Savile? What do you mean?" he sighed in a slow, harsh voice. "There is one in it, that is all. It looks quite old and dusty, and I have not the slightest intention of eating it. What is the matter, Arthur?" "How would you look?" Lord Arthur rushed across the room and seized the box. Inside it was the amber-colored capsule with its poison bubble. Lady Clementine had died a natural death after all. The shock of the discovery was almost too much for him. He flung the capsule into the fire and sank on the sofa with a cry of despair. Mr. Merton was a good deal distressed at the second postponement of the marriage, and Lady Julia, who had already ordered her dress for the wedding, did all in her power to make Savile pray of the match. Truly, however, as Savile loved her mother, she would give her whole life into Lord Arthur's hands, and nothing that Lady Julia could say could make her waver in her faith. As for Lord Arthur himself, it took him days to get over his terrible disappointment, and for a time his nerves were completely unstrung. His excellent common sense, however, soon asserted itself, and his sound practical mind did not leave him long in doubt about what to do. Poison having proved a complete failure, dynamite or some other form of explosive was obviously the proper thing to try. He accordingly looked again over the list of his friends and relatives, and after careful consideration determined to blow up his uncle, the Dean of Chichester. The Dean, who has a man of great culture and learning, was extremely fond of clocks and had a wonderful collection of timepieces ranging from the 15th century to the present day, and it seemed to Lord Arthur that this hobby of the good deeds offered him an excellent opportunity for carrying out his scheme. Where to purchase an explosive machine was, of course, quite another matter. The London Directory gave him no information on the point, and he felt that there was very little use in going to Scotland Yard about it, as they never seemed to know anything about the movements of the dynamite faction till after an explosion had taken place, and not much even then. Suddenly, the tongue of his friend Rovalov, a young Russian of very revolutionary tendencies, whom he had met a lady Vandermeers in the winter. Count Rovalov was supposed to be writing a life of Peter the Great, and to have come over to England for the purpose of studying the documents relating to the Tsar's residence in this country as a ship carpenter, but it was generally suspected that he was a nihilist agent, and there was no doubt that the Russian embassy did not look with any favor upon his presence in London. Lord Arthur felt that he was just the man for his purpose, and drove down one morning to his lodgings in Bloomsbury to ask his advice and assistance. "So, you are taking up politics seriously?" said Count Rovalov, when Lord Arthur had told him the object of his mission. But Lord Arthur, who had swagger of any kind, felt bound to admit to him that he had not the slightest interest in social questions, and simply wanted the explosive machine for a purely family matter, in which no one was concerned but himself. Count Rovalov looked at him for some moments in amazement, and then, saying that he was quite serious, wrote an address on the piece of paper, initialed it, and handed it to him across the table. Scotland Yard would give a good deal to know this address, my dear fellow." "They should not have it," cried Lord Arthur, "ha ha ha," laughing, and after shaking the young Russian warmly by the hand, he ran downstairs, examined the paper, and told the coachman to drive to Soho Square. There he dismissed him, and strolled down Craig Street till he came to a place called Palace Court. He passed under the archway, and found himself in Corey's cool passage that was apparently occupied by a French laundry, as a perfect network of clotheslines was stretched across from house to house, and there was a flutter of white linen in the morning air. He walked right to the end and knocked at a little greenhouse. After some delay, during which every window in the court became a blurred mass of peering faces, the door was opened by a rather rogue-looking foreigner, who asked him in very bad English what his business was. Lord Arthur handed him the paper Count Rollo had given him. When the man saw it, he bowed and invited Lord Arthur into a very shabby front parlour on the ground floor, and in a few moments Herr Winkelkopf, as he was called in England, bustled into the room, with a very Weinstein napkin round his neck and a frog in his left hand. Count Rollo has given me an introduction to you, said Lord Arthur, bowing, and I am anxious to have a short interview with you on a matter of business. My name is Smith, Mr. Robert Smith, and I want you to supply me with an explosive cloak. Charmed to meet you, Lord Arthur, said the genial little German, lodging. Don't look so alarmed. It is my duty to know everybody, and I remember seeing you one evening at Lady Windermere's. I hope her ladyship is quite well. Do you mind sitting with me while I finish my breakfast? There is an excellent bed, and my friends are kind enough to say that my wine is better than any they get at the German embassy. And before Lord Arthur had got over his surprise at being recognized, he found himself seated in the back room, sipping the most delicious Marco-Brenner out of a pale yellow hook-glass mug with the imperial monogram, and catching in the friendliest manner possible to the famous conspirator.
Explosive clocks, said Herr Winkelkopf, are not very good things for foreign exportation, as even if they succeed in passing the custom house, the train service is so irregular that they usually go off before they have reached their proper destination. If, however, you want one for home house, I can supply you with an excellent article and guarantee that you will be satisfied with the result. I ask for whom it is intended. If it is for the police or for anyone connected with Scotland Yard, I am afraid I can do anything for you. The English detectives are really our best friend, and I have always found that by relying on their stupidity, we can do exactly what we like. I could not spare one of them. I assure you, said Lord Arthur, that it has nothing to do with the police at all. In fact, the clock is intended for the Dean of Chichester. Dear me, I had no idea that you felt so strongly about religion, Lord Arthur. Few young men do nowadays. I'm afraid you overrate me, Herr Winkelkopf, said Lord Arthur, blushing. The fact is, I really know nothing about theology. It is a purely private matter then. Purely private? Herr Winkelkopf shrugged his shoulders and left the room, returning in a few minutes with a round cake of dynamite about the size of a penny and a pretty little French cloak, surmounted by an armored figure or liberty trembling on the hydra of despotism. Lord Arthur's face brightened up when he saw it. That is just what I want, he cried. And now tell me how it goes off. Ah, there is my secret, answered Herr Winkelkopf, contemplating his invitation with a justifiable look of pride. Let me know when you wish it to explode and I will set the machine to the moment. Well, today is Tuesday and if you could send it off at once. That is impossible. I have a great deal of important work on hand for some friend of mine in Moscow. Still, I may send it off tomorrow. Oh, I will be quite time enough, said Lord Arthur politely, if it is delivered tomorrow night or Thursday morning. For the moment of the explosion, say Friday at noon exactly. The Dean is always at home that hour. Friday at noon, replied Herr Winkelkopf, and he made a note to that effect in a large ledger that was lying on a bureau near the fireplace. And now, said Lord Arthur, reaching for his seat, pray let me know how much I am in your debt. It is such a small matter, Lord Arthur, that I do not care to make any charge. The dynamite comes to 7 and 6 pence, the clock will be 3 pounds 10, and the carriage about 5 shillings. I am only too pleased to oblige any friend of Count Raufalov's. But your trouble, Herr Winkelkopf. Oh, that is nothing. It is pleasure to me. I do not work for money. I live entirely for my art. Lord Arthur lied down. 4 and 2 and 6 on the table, thanked the little German for his kindness, and having success in declining an invitation to meet some anarchists at a meeting on the following Saturday, left the house and went off to the park. For the next 2 days, he was in a state of the greatest excitement, and on Friday at 12 o'clock, he drove down to Buckingham to wait for news. All the afternoon, the Story Hall porter kept posting up telegrams for various parts of the country giving the result of horse race, the verdict in divorce suit, the state of the weather, and the like, while the tape ticket out very some detail about an all-next sitting in House of Commons, and a small panic of the stock exchange at 4 o'clock at the evening papers came in, and Lord Arthur disappeared into the library with the Pall Mall, the James, the club, and the echo to the immense indignation of Colonel Goldchild, who went to read the report of a speech he had delivered that morning at the Mansion House on the subject of South African mission and the advisability of having black bishops in every province, and for some reason or other had a strong prejudice against the evening news. None of the papers, however, contained even the slightest allusion to Chichester, and Lord Arthur felt that the attempt must have failed. It was a terrible blow to him, and for a time he was quite unnerved. Herr Winkelkopf, whom he went to see the next day, was full the elaborate apologies and offered to supply him with another clock free of charge, or with a case of nitroglycerin bombs at cost price. But he had lost all faith in explosive, and Herr Winkel called himself acknowledged that everything is so adulterated nowadays that even dynamite can hardly be got in a pure condition. The little German, however, while admitting that something must have gone wrong with the machinery, was not without hope that the clock might still go off, and instanced that case of a barometer that he had sent to the military governor at Odessa, which took time to explode in 10 days, had not done so far something like 3 months. It was quite true that when it did go off, it merely succeeded in blowing osmet to atoms, the governor having gone out of town 6 weeks before. But at least it saw what that dynamite as a destructive force was when under the control of machinery. A powerful talk somewhat unfactual again. Lord Arthur was a little consoled by this reflection, but even her he was destined to disappointment for 2 days afterwards. As he was going upstairs, the Duchess called him into her boudoir and showed him a letter she had just received from the deanery. Jane writes charming letters, said the Duchess. You must really read her last. It is quite as good as the novels Moody sent us. Lord Arthur says the letter from her hand. It ran as follows. Thank you so much for the flannel for the Dorcas Society and also for the Guggenheim. I quite agree with you that it is nonsense they're wanting to wear pretty things, but everybody is so radical and irreligious nowadays that it is difficult to make them see that they should not try and dress like the upper classes. I'm sorry, I don't know what we are coming to. As Papa has often said in his sermons, we live in an age of unbelief. We have had great fun over a clock that an unknown admirer sent Papa last Thursday. It arrived in a wooden box from London, carried by, and Papa feels it must have been sent by someone who had read his remarkable sermon. It is license liberty, for on the top of the clock was a figure of a woman with what Papa said was the cap of liberty of her head. I didn't think it very becoming myself, but Papa said it was historical. I suppose it is all right. Parker unpacked it, and Papa put it on the mantelpiece in library. And we were all sitting there on Friday morning, when just as the clock struck 12, we heard a whirring noise. A little puff of smoke came from the pedestal of the figure, and the goddess of liberty fell off and broke her nose on the fender. Maria was quite alarmed, but it is looked so ridiculous that James and I went off into fits of laughter, and even Papa was amused. When we examined it, we found it was a sort of alarm clock, and that if you set it to a particular hour and put some gunpowder and a cap under a little hammer, it went off whenever you want. Papa said it must not remain in the library as it made a noise, so Regis carried it away to schoolroom and does nothing but have small explosion all day long. Do you think Arthur would like one for a wedding present? I suppose they are quite fashionable in London. Papa says they should do a great deal of good, as they saw that liberty can clash, but must fall down. Papa says liberty was invented at the time of the French Revolution. How awful it seemed. When he got upstairs, he flung himself on a sofa, and his eyes filled the stairs. He had done his best to commit this murder, but on both occasions he had failed, and through not fault of his own. He had tried to do his duty, but it seems as if destiny herself had turned traitor. He was oppressed with the sense of the barrenness of the good intention, of the futility of trying to be fine. Perhaps it would be better to break off the marriage altogether. Sybil would suffer, it is true, but suffering could not really mar a nature so noble as hers. As for himself, what did it matter? There is always somewhere in which a man can die, some cause to which a man can give his life, and as life had no pleasure for him, so death had no terror. Let destiny work out his doom. He would not stir to help her. At 7:30 he dressed and went down to the club. Surbiton was there with a party of young men, and he was obliged to dine with them. Their trivial conversation and idle jests did not interest him, and as soon as coffee was brought he left them, inventing some engagement in order to get away. He was going out of the club, and hall porter handed him a letter. It was from her Winklecoff, asking him to call down the next evening and look at an explosive umbrella that went off as soon as it was opened. It was the very latest invention and had just arrived from Geneva. He tore the letter up into fragments. He had made up his mind not to try any more experiment. Then they wandered down to the Thames embankment and sat for hours by the river. The moon peered through a man of tawny cloud, as if it were a lion the tide, and the railway signal changed from green to scarlet as the trains ran shrieking across the bridge. After some time, 12 o'clock boomed from the tall tower at Westminster, and at each stroke of the sonorous bell the next seemed to tremble. Then the railway lights went out, one solitary lamp left gleaming like a large ruby on a giant mast, and the roar of the city became fainter. At 2 o'clock he got up and started towards Blackfriars. How unreal everything looked! How like a strange dream! The houses on the other side of the river seemed built out of darkness. One would have said that silver and shadow had fashioned the world anew, and the whole dawn of Aesopus loomed like a bubble toward the dusky air. Suicide of Charon Romantis. He turned pale, the excitement, and began to read. The paragraph ran as follows. Yesterday morning at 7 o'clock, the body of Mr. Septimus R. Potker, the eminent Chiromantis, was on shore at Greenwich, just in front of the Ship Hotel. The unfortunate gentleman had been missing for some days, and considerable anxiety for his safety had been felt in Chiromantic's circle. It is supposed that he committed suicide under the influence of a temporary mental derangement caused by overwork, and a verdict to that effect was returned this afternoon by coroner's jury. Mr. Potker had just completed an elaborate treatise on the subject of the human hand that will shortly be published, when it will not doubt attract much attention. The thesis was 65 years of age and does not seem to have left any relation. Lord Arthur rushed out of the club with the paper still in his hand, to the immense amazement of the hall porter, who tried in vain to stop him and drove at once to Park Lane. Savile saw him from the window, and something told her that he was the bearer of good news. She ran down to meet him, and when she saw his face, she knew that all was well. "My dear Savile," cried Lord Arthur, "let us be married tomorrow." "You foolish boy, why the cake is not even ordered," said Savile, looking through her tears. When the wedding took place, some weeks later, Peters was crowded with a perfect mob of smart people. The service was read in the most impressive manner by the Dean of Chichester, and everybody agreed that they had never seen a handsomer couple and the bride and bridegroom. They were more than handsome, however, they were happy. Never for a single moment did Lord Arthur regret all that he had suffered for Savile's sake, while she on her side gave him the best things a woman can give to any man: worship, tenderness, and love. For the romance was not killed by reality. They always felt young. Some years afterwards, When two beautiful children had been born to them, Lady Windermere came down on a visit to Alton Priory, a lovely old place that had been the Duke's wedding present to his son. And one afternoon, as she was sitting with Lady Arthur under a lime tree in the garden, watching the little boy and girl as they played up and down the rose walk in fitful sunbeams, and suddenly took her hostess and hand in hers and said, "Are you happy, Savile?" "Dear Lady Windermere, of course I'm happy, aren't you?" "I have no time to be happy, Savile. I always like the last person who is introduced to me. But as a rule, as soon as I know people, I get tired of them. Don't your lion satisfy you, Lady Windermere?" Oh dear, no. Lions are only good for one season. As soon as their manners are cut, they are the dullest creatures going. Besides, they behave very badly if you are really nice to them. Do you remember that horrid Mr. Podcourse? He was a dreadful impostor. Of course, I didn't mind that at all. And even when he wanted to borrow money, I forgave him, but I could not stand his making love to me. He was really mad me had chiromancy. I go in for telepathy now. It is much more amusing. You must not say anything against chiromancy, her, Lady Windermere. It is the only subject that Arthur does not like people to cough about. I assure you he is quite serious over it. You don't mean to say that he believes in it, Savile? Asked him, Lady Windermere. Here he is. And Lord Arthur came up the garden with a large bunch of yellow roses in his hand and his two children dancing round him. Lord Arthur? Yes, Lady Windermere. You don't mean to say that you believe in chiromancy? Of course I do, said the young man smiling. But why? Because I owe to it all the happiness of my life. He murmured, throwing himself into a wicker chair. My dear Arthur, what do you owe to it? Savile, he answered, handing his wife the rose and looking into violet eyes. What nonsense, cried Lady Windermere. I never heard such nonsense in all my life.